Harry stopped in shock, telling Peter that he's going to want to see this, and he would take Peter to the attic room. They would slowly walk on the edge of the room, and it was about 3 feet from the ceiling. Peter couldn't even believe his eyes. He saw everything, looking at everything in amazement. There were gliders, suits, and he smiled, telling Harry what was his dad doing with all of this technology. Harry looked at Peter, telling him, "You promise you won't tell anybody. If this gets out to the public eye, my dad's image is ruined. I don't know what he's up to right now, but we need to keep this between us." Peter would agree, and they would both walk slowly back into the room, seeing MJ on the ceiling. Mary Jane would fall down, landing on her feet. She would explain everything to them, and she would use her powers in front of Peter and Harry, asking them what can she do. She wanted to go home. She wanted to have a normal life, go to school, but now it seems like this is way too far off. Peter asked Mary Jane what she wanted to do with her powers. She could be like a superhero if she wanted to be one. She would look up at Peter, laughing into his face, telling him that that was impossible and that she was far from being a superhero. She told him that she needed money and that she had to live somewhere else for now. Harry told her that she could live with him, and she didn't know what to say. Peter started walking around thinking of ideas, and he would look in the paper seeing a fight with Bonesaw for 3 grand. It was a perfect idea. He would pick up the paper showing Mary Jane it, and she would start laughing, saying a fight with Bonesaw wasn't going to cut it. There was going to be way too many risks, but the money was good. Peter asked Harry to get out a piece of paper, and Peter started designing a suit. This costume would almost look like the first appearance of the Miles Morales costume, but it had baby blue and red, with giant eyes, and the mask was showing her mouth and hair. MJ smiled looking at the design, and she would pick up the piece of paper staring at it. She loved the idea. Spider-Woman was a perfect name, and MJ thought this would set her up. She would leave Queens starting fresh, and with this 3 grand on the line, she was going to win and take the money, starting a new career. Peter looked at the time on his watch, saying to Harry it was getting late and that he had to leave. Harry would ask Peter to meet him at the school tomorrow and that they were going to be getting the tickets for the show. Peter looked at MJ, saying he was going to make her a suit, and he would leave, walking out of the house. Peter ran home almost out of breath, and he would open the door. Uncle Ben would look at him, and he would ask him where he was the entire time. Peter said that he went to Harry's house, and Uncle Ben would explain to Peter that the school phoned. Peter would put his head down, and Uncle Ben told Peter to come inside. They would sit down, and Uncle Ben looked at Peter, explaining that he was changing and that he was turning into a new man. But he said, remember, just because you can beat him up doesn't give you the right to. Peter knew that Uncle Ben was right and that he had to be a better person. He told Uncle Ben that it was Flash's fault and that he did deserve it, but he only did it because he was defending himself and he was defending Harry. Uncle Ben would smile, saying, "You're in your last days of school, Peter. Just let it go and have fun," and he would let him walk away. Peter would walk into his room. Peter opened the door to his room, designing Mary Jane's new costume. He would have 2 versions of the suit, a homemade one and a new one that they were going to have to buy materials for. He also thought to himself, what was Harry's father up to? Gliders, suits? Peter didn't let it get to him, and he wasn't going to be losing sleep over this. Back at the Osborn residence house, Harry and MJ would be talking, and Harry told MJ that he wished that he could give company money to her, but it would be too risky. Mary Jane would thank Harry for the support, and she would smile, kissing Harry Osborn. There would be a yell at the door, and Norman would open the door, looking at Harry sitting alone in his room. MJ, in time, crawled up the ceiling, not being noticed. Norman sat down near Harry, saying he was sorry for everything that happened, but he needed to do more business calls and meetings. Harry said, "I get it, you're a businessman," and Norman would smile, saying to him he was going to find whoever stole from them, and when he does, things are going to be better soon. Norman would smile, walking away, shutting the door. MJ would drop down, saying that was a close call, and Harry laughed and smiled. He knew in the back of his head that something was off with his dad, and he knew that he wanted to find out soon. MJ was starting to have feelings for Harry, but she felt bad because she thought she was taking advantage of him, and she would leave the house at night, and Harry in the morning would open the door, but nobody was there. Mary Jane started getting a feel for her powers, knowing that maybe she could control them soon. She was nailing her swinging ability, swinging from small buildings, and Mary Jane swung to the back of the school with her backpack, and she would go on top of the building. She could see missing flyers of herself, and MJ saw Peter and Harry talking in the alleyway, and they would meet there. MJ would drop to the ground, doing a backflip. She explained to them that she was training all day, and she was still starting to learn her powers. Peter and Harry would smile, looking nervous, and they told MJ what she thought of the new suit. MJ would look in amazement, seeing a baby blue and red Spider-Woman costume. Mary Jane would thank them for the costume and told them this was going to to do for now for her wrestling match. MJ used her webs to grab Peter's bag, and she would change into her costume right in front of Peter and Harry. Peter and Harry would be laughing, and they would turn around. Peter said that was very unnecessary, and Mary Jane asked what did they think of her costume. Harry would say amazing, and Peter would say spectacular. Mary Jane told them if they had any plans or if they were going to be watching the fight on TV. Harry took 2 tickets out of his pocket, saying that he bought them, and Peter started explaining what was going to go down. Peter was going to steal his Uncle Ben's car at night once he goes to sleep with his Aunt May, and Harry was going to drive it there so they could get in the front row. Mary Jane said to them to be careful, and she would thank them for everything. She would smile, putting her mask on, saying that it fit perfectly, and she would start crawling up the wall, swinging away. She started swinging to Harry Osborn's place. Harry looked at Peter, and he revealed that his father was going crazy, and that the stuff he stole from the company was going to destroy their family. Peter told Harry if he thought of turning him over to the cops, and Harry said, "Are you crazy? Turning my father in? Then I'll have nothing." Peter put his head down and told Harry to wait it out and see what happens, because there might be something bigger going on that they don't understand. It would be near the end of the day, and Harry and Peter would go to class, and the bells would ring. MJ would be in the distance looking at everybody leave the school. She was on top of a building. She could see all the students walk out, and she would start swinging to the wrestling match. This was it. She knew that if she can win, she was going to start a fresh life, leaving everything behind. Peter and Harry waited for Uncle Ben and Aunt May to go to sleep, and Harry was getting mad, saying that they must take forever to go to bed. Peter would start laughing, saying not to worry, and he would hand Harry the keys to the car. They would get into the vehicle, and they would start driving fast. Peter asked Harry to slow down, but he would start speeding up, and they would be going through red lights. They parked the car outside near the library, and it was getting dark out. Harry took his seatbelt off, and he looked at Peter. Peter asked him what was wrong, and Harry would explain that MJ was his girlfriend now, and that since she was sleeping over, they became closer. Peter looked at Harry in absolute shock, and he made a joke saying, "Well, I guess I'm with Gwen Stacy then," and Harry and Peter started laughing. They would get out of the car, and they would walk to the entranceway. Loud noises could be heard, and MJ was getting scared. She never went into one of these wrestling matches before. The crowd was on fire and chanting. It was getting louder and louder as she walked into the doors, getting in line. The lady would ask MJ what she was doing here, and the lady would explain that the woman division wasn't fighting today. Mary Jane told the lady that she was perfectly fine fighting tonight, and they would explain that it wasn't possible. Mary Jane demanded, telling the lady that she wanted in, and they would agree. The lady at the front desk would say, "Sign your life away here," and she would hand Mary Jane a contract. She would sign the paper, leaving into the arena. Peter walked inside yelling at Harry, telling him that MJ was there, and he would point his finger at her. She was signing the paper, and she walked into the curtain. Harry and Peter would pick up food, walking into the stands laughing and cheering. Peter would ask if Harry was worried that she was going to lose, and he told Peter to show some faith. Mary Jane was ready to fight, and her adrenaline was high. She knew that she had to take it easy with this guy because she didn't want to kill him, but she thought to herself she could control her powers and that everything was going to be fine. Bonesaw in the ring would pick up one of the wrestlers doing a pile driver, and he would knock him out, winning the match. Bonesaw would pick up the mic saying who's next, and they would call out the spectacular Spider-Woman. Bonesaw looked at the curtains drop in shock, seeing it was a girl. He dropped the mic, and the crowd started to laugh. He started shouting at the referee, telling her to get the F out of here. Mary Jane pointed her wrists, and out would come webs. They would catch the top of the building, and she swung into the arena, doing a front flip right into the ring. The crowd would go silent, and people would start to cheer. They were all cheering for Spider-Woman, and Harry and Peter looked at everyone, and they started joining in. Mary Jane could see both of them cheering in the crowd, knowing that she couldn't fail. Everybody was counting on her because her life literally depended on it. The cage would start closing in on her, and she started looking around. The cage would shut, and she tried asking Bonesaw to tell them to fight outside of the cage, but the bell would ring. Bonesaw charged at her, and he would try grabbing her, but she would do a front flip over Bonesaw, landing on his shoulders. MJ used her webs, wrapping it around Bonesaw's neck, and she started punching him in the face, yelling at Bonesaw. She told him to give up, but Bonesaw used his left hand, and he would throw MJ to the ground. She would hit the mat really hard, and things were starting to go blurry. Bonesaw would pick her up by the neck, and she would be thrown into the steel cage. MJ used her spider sense, holding the cage bars, and she started pulling them apart. She ripped the bars open and did a backflip. She landed behind Bonesaw, kicking him in the back, and he fell face first into the hole in the cage. She would use her webs, and the webs would go on on Bonesaw's back. MJ would pull Bonesaw out of the cage, catching him in the air, and she would suplex him onto the ground. He was defeated. Bonesaw started crying, begging for the match to end, and MJ looked at him, and she would kick him in the face, and Bonesaw would roll over. She finished the job off, and Peter and Harry started cheering. The referee would raise her hand up, saying that she was the winner. Harry said that she can start a new life now, and said to Peter, let's get out of here before the crowd swarms in. Peter would agree, and they would run out of the stadium. Mary Jane went to the back of the event, and she could see the guy that was counting money. The guy would give her $100, and Mary Jane would demand, wanting more. She looked at him in shock, telling the guy that she needed the money, and the man would say that he missed the part where that was his problem, and MJ knew that she couldn't steal the money. It could cause a bad reputation for her now new gimmick. MJ walked out of the room, and a man with a bag would walk in. MJ could hear the guy demanding money. This man would punch the guy in the face, and he would start running out of the building. They told her to stop that guy, and MJ used her webs, knocking the robber to the ground. She would pick him up, slamming the guy into the hallway walls, punching him in the face. The guy that counted the money couldn't even believe it. He looked at her in shock, saying thank you, and he would pick up the bag of money, giving it to her. She would smile, leaving in the elevator, and the cops would arrest Dennis Carradine, the robber that originally killed Uncle Ben. But this time, in this new universe, Uncle Ben lives. Harry and Peter started walking towards the cops, but they would see somebody. The man would try breaking into the window, and he would open the car door. Harry started running. He told Peter to catch up, but Peter told him to wait, but it was too late. Harry ran, seeing the guy, and he would open the door, catching him off surprise. Harry punched him in the face, throwing him to the ground. The guy's gun fell on the ground, and Harry started punching him in the face, but the guy dodged the attack, and Harry landed a punch into the concrete ground. He screamed in pain, and Peter and the guy looked at the gun. Peter kicked the gun out of the way, and the guy would try punching him, but Peter would dodge the attacks, landing a punch in his face. Harry took his legs, and they would tackle him to the ground. Mary Jane started walking, trying to find Peter and Harry, but there was nobody in sight. She would start hearing a cry for help, and it was Harry Osborn. A gunshot would go off, and she would start running. She couldn't even believe what she saw.